Well, hello fellow taxpayers and harpaholics. And thanks for joining me for this little video. It's been a while since I put up anything substantial. But I recently had the delight of opening up and working on my very first Pommy amp. And although we colonials have mixed feelings about the mother country, we do recognise that they did give us the Goons and Monty Python and the Two Ronnies, amongst other pleasures. So it was actually an honour to work on this 50-plus-year-old member of the early rock community. And if you're interested, keep watching. Okay, folks, we're now on to the 1971 Marshall bass head. It's up here, and it hasn't been used for quite a long time, so we're just going to bring it up on the Variac and check out the health of the capacitors and see if it's safe to use. But it looks gorgeous. Oh, one issue is the proprietary Belkin power cord socket plug. That's it, the plug, which is Bakelite and which is broken. And I believe that there is some controversy even over whether to replace the whole thing with an IEC socket or to source an original Belkin plug. I'm not too sure which camp we will end up in. Hey Josh, here's a quick update on the Marshall. I've replaced two of the filter cap cans, but the third one is proving a little bit of a problem. The first two were accessible from underneath the chassis, but the third one is underneath the board. I've tried lifting the board, but it won't move very far, and it looks as though I'm going to have to disconnect some of the wires, and so that I know where to put everything back again, I'm going to have to make out a diagram of the circuit board, identifying all the components and connections. With vintage Fender amps, diagrams like that are available online, but there's nothing available for the Marshall, unfortunately. So anyway, getting there, but it may take a little while. The replacement plug that fits straight into that hole, and so you can use an ordinary kettle plug. The one that you need is only available from Germany. I've ordered one, and they're usually pretty quick, but when I say quick, a couple of weeks. So we'll see how that goes. I know you don't need to use this straight away, so just letting you know that there are a few roadblocks in the way, but we'll get there. I've also got replacers for these two and those two, and there's another little electrolytic capacitor down here. They all need to be replaced before I can turn the thing on and try it out. Anyway, one step at a time. Now, the old style AC power socket on this 1971 Marshall is no longer considered legal or safe, and accepted practice is to replace it with an IEC connector. However, the standard connector requires having to cut a shaped hole into the chassis and is going to leave a little bit of a gap above and below, so that's not really acceptable. There is, however, available at some cost and difficulty, this nifty little socket, which is available from Tube Amp Doctor in Germany, and as you can see, the mounting holes match up, and I believe, we'll see when it comes to it, but I believe that will fit into the round hole that is already in the chassis. So the new power socket is in, and I've wired up the active and neutral wires. But interestingly enough, there was no suitable earth connection to the chassis with the original amp, and it is very important that we have a safe and secure earth connection for the 240 volts coming in. Now usually I would try to find a suitable hole that's already in the chassis to bolt an earth connection down, but I couldn't find one, so unfortunately I have had to drill a new hole. I've just drilled one in the side of the chassis, and I've scraped through the plating on both sides, so we're back to shiny metal, and a new earth will be securely attached, which you'll see in a minute. So this old Marshall has no discernible colour code for the wiring, but I've used the internationally accepted code of green for the earth, for the incoming AC wall voltage. So there it is, a nice substantial green wire bolted, that's crimped and bolted to the chassis. I've got two of the cap cans replaced on the Marshall, but the other one is proving a little bit difficult. Even though I've loosened the board, the leads that go from the board to the base of the cap can are so short and so tight that I can't lift the board, and I can't pull the loosened cap out far enough to get to the leads. So what I'm going to have to do is I've located the two leads to the cap can. It's these red ones here and here, either side of the dropping resistor. So I'm going to have to desolder those, and then I'll be able to pull the can out from the other side and replace those with longer leads when I replace the can. Okay, funny story, and there's a classic example of overlooking the obvious. So I've replaced the cap cans and the bypass cap on the first stage of the Marshall, and I thought it was time to start things up on the Variac and just check voltages without the tubes in. And I was getting voltage on the filaments, but I was not getting any high tension, and I was starting to worry that there might be some problem with the power transformer, which would be a terrible tragedy on a classic amp of this age. So walked away from it, came back another day, which is always a good idea when things don't seem to be making sense. And I did notice that there didn't seem to be any continuity on the power switch when it was in the on position. And bugger me, the switch is mounted the wrong way around. Now, I don't know whether this may be a non-original switch. There's a little locking tab, which means that the switch can only be fitted to the faceplate one way. So what it means is the switch has to be in the off position to be on, and that's what was stuffing me up. So fortunately, the power transformer is not cactus, and I've just been bringing the voltage up gradually for the new filter caps, and I've got it running on half power at the moment, 120 volts, and a little MP3 player at the input, and let's see what happens. So all the dials are in the noon position. That's a little bit distorted, so there's still some troubleshooting. But we have audio. So it's alive. More work to be done, but that's looking good. Okay, after half an hour, gradually building up the wall voltage, and we're now running on full strength, 240 volts. There's the current limiter, just a faint glow in the filament, and transformers still cool to the touch. And big thanks to Benny and the Fly-By-Nighters for providing the test audio through the house speaker.
Singing life, now don't you go wrong wherever we go.
Good result. Well, it's time to button up this early 1971 Marshall head. It's the first Marshall that I've had an opportunity to work on, and it's been great. Apart from the difficulty getting underneath the board to change a few components, but really nice to see how these are laid out. I have just replaced these big two snubber capacitors. All the other vintage components seem to be terrific, really good. The other thing I wanted to do was to check the bias. There are two lovely early Dutch Phillips EL34s in the output section, and I wanted to make sure they were biased correctly and see how well they matched up. Now, I used the bias calculator on Rob Robinette's site. That's very handy, I think, for any people who don't have the necessary formulas in their head and want to be able to just take some measurements, put it into the calculator and find out how well the amp is biased. So I measured the resistance of the primary windings of the output transformer, and that's done by measuring the resistance between the plate, pin 3 on each of the power tubes, and the B plus going to the centre tap of the output transformer. And conveniently I can measure that right here at the high tension fuse. So I measure without the amp turned on, measure the resistance between those 2 points for both of the tubes, and then with the amp turned on and idling, measure the voltage difference across the same points in the circuit, and you can do the calculation from there. So excuse the scribble, but here's what I found for V4, the first of the pair of EL34s. The resistance of the output transformer primary for that tube was 42 ohms. The plate voltage is a quite reasonably low 352 volts. And then for the other output tube, 44 ohms was the resistance. And then with the amp turned on, I also measured it's fixed bias, I measured the bias voltage, which is exactly 60 volts, which is what it should be. So for V4, there was a 1.87 volt drop across the winding, and for the other tube, a voltage drop of 2.2 volts. So that looks like a little bit of difference there. So I calculated that out and found that the first tube was drawing 44.5 milliamps, and the other one was drawing 50 milliamps. So the first one is power dissipation of 15.7 watts. The EL34s have a maximum dissipation of 25 watts each, so that calculates out at 63% dissipation. For the other one, 17.6 watts and 70.4%. 70.4% is pretty much at the upper limit of what is comfortable. So these figures are within a good range, but is that difference safe? So I've found that although most people who work on amps would like to have a difference of less than 10% to call this a matched pair of tubes, the industry standard is as long as it's within 20%, that is acceptable. So the difference between this case is 12%, so we are okay. And in fact, if you're wanting a really clean sound from your amp, then you want the two tubes to be matched as closely as possible. But if you want a little bit of hair and a little bit of breakup, then a higher level of mismatch is desirable. So it just depends on what you want from your amp. But with this particular pair of 50-year-old output tubes, they are chugging along nicely and in good symmetry, so that's a good result. Well, it's time for the Marshall to go back in its case, and this is, as you can see, in very nice condition considering it's 50 years old. But there are a couple of little nicks that might need sticking down with a bit of super glue. Yep, here's one. We don't want that to get any worse, so get those edges down. It's got the original feet. There's another little area. Where is it? There. That one needs stabilising. Otherwise, give it a once over and see if there are any others like that. But as I said, the old girl is in great shape, considering more than 50 years since she came out of the shop. Well, it's been a privilege getting to know this grand survivor of the rock wars, and now that she's been looked over and made safe to play, it's time for somebody with a few chops to plug in and see what the fuss is all about. So that's the jazz channel, is it?
It must be.